Good morning as we go to the Chitas of today. We're holding Friday, which is the sixth reading in the portion of Kishita. We're holding on chapter 34, verse number 10. Ayemer, and God said, Hine anechi kodesh bris. Behold, I'm gonna form a covenant. I'm gonna form a covenant. Neged in front of your entire nation. I will do miracles. It's an entire Ashali Nivru, which has never been created. It's in the entire land. Amongst all the nations of the world, and the entire people see which you live in their midst. Hashem, the acts of God, because they are truly inspiring, wondrous. Which I'm doing with you. This Rashi says, I'm making a covenant concerning this. Niflois esa, an expression related to neflinu, as you'll be distinguished, meaning they'll be separate from the pagan nations. The Shekhinah shall not rest upon these other nations that are pagans. Be careful which I'm commanding you today. I'm going to be chased away from your face. Now she says, these are the six nations. Groshi, because the nation of the Groshi, they got up and they left. Be very careful. May you make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land. Which you come to live there. There'll be a snare in your midst. You shall demolish their altars. Saying to Shabbat, we should break the monuments. You should cut down the sacred trees. Now she says this was a tree that they would worship in that time. You shouldn't prostrate yourself for another God. Hashem Kana Shmoi, God, whose name is jealous. El Kana, who is a jealous God? What does that mean? God is zealous to mete out retribution, and he's not indulgent. That is the meaning of the expression of jealousy. When used in connection with God, it means that he is steadfast in his superiority over other deities and exact retribution upon those forsaken. The negative concept of idol worship. And may you form a covenant with those that live in the land. You'll run after their gods. You will slaughter to their gods. And they'll call upon you, and you'll eat from their slaughterings. Ash says you might think there's no punishment by eating it, but when you eat it, it's clear that if you can endorse its worship. For through this eating of the sacrifice, you will come to take the daughters and their sons. The verse says, you'll take their daughters into marriage, and you'll marry their daughters, and the daughters will take astray your sons after their gods, as benecha, your sons after their gods. A god of a molten god, he shall not make for you. Verse 18, as Chag HaMatzah, you should you should make sure to watch the holiday of Pesach. Shivas Yom Techa Matzah, for 7 days you shall eat matzahs. Asher Tzivitzich, which I commanded. An appointed time in the month of spring, we're coming to that. Because in the springtime, Yatzas Mitzrayim went out of the land of Egypt. Is actually the month of ripening, and the grain first to ripen. All open the wombs are mine, all firstborn are mine. We call mincha all the livestock. The zacher that our sons, the peter, sirs, beseh, emerges from the ox in the land. The first one belonged to me. She says, Kopeta Echem Li goes among Torah's talking about humans, firstborn. We call Mitnecha, and all your livestock that bears a firstborn male by the emergence of the ox or a lamb from the womb, meaning the male will open its womb. Its firstborn is a male. We're talking about not the firstborn of a girl, whether it's for the people, humans, or whether it's for animals. The firstborn is talking about a firstborn son. Peter means to be opened. Similarly, beginning is like come like something that opens. That's why the mitzvah of Pidyon Aben is only by a firstborn who comes from the natural birth, not through a C-section. Peter Chamer, and the firstborn of a donkey. Tifta b'seh, you shall change, redeem with the lamb. Tifta, if you don't redeem the donkey with the lamb, right after, you have to decapitate it. Kol b'chor b'necha tifta. All firstborns of your son you should redeem. You should not appear before me empty-handed. Now she says that the Torah separates the donkey from all other impure animals. Only the firstborn of a donkey is redeemed. And the Gemara says, because God honored the donkeys that left everything out of Mitzrayim, or the donkeys, and he honored the donkeys to give them this mitzvah, only donkeys that their firstborn would be redeemed. What does that mean? The owner gives a lamb to the kohen. It becomes the ordinary unconsecrated property of the kohen. And the firstborn donkey may be put to work by the owner. So as long as the firstborn donkey is not given a seh to the kohen, then you cannot work. The first donkey doesn't belong to you. You have to decapitate it. But after that is decapitated by a cleaver, rationally caused the kohen to lose his money by neglecting to give him the redemption land. Therefore, he must lose his own money by decapitating this donkey. All your firstborns of your son you shall redeem. The redemption is, Torah says later in the book of Numbers, is by establishing a 5 slime, as it says, and the redemption shall be performed at the age of 1 month by the evaluation of 5 shekel. What is over here? You shall not come empty-handed. According to the simple meaning of the verse, this is a separate matter from the rest of the verse. And it's unrelated to the firstborn because there's no obligation to appear in the temple, the commandment dealing with the firstborn. Instead, this is another warning, meaning that when you ascend to the temple on the festival, in Pesach's coming up, Mashiach's going to come, we're all going to go to the Beis HaMikdash. It's incumbent, you shall not appear before me empty-handed. But it's incumbent upon you to bring a burnt offering. You're obligated to bring an oilus liyah. When everyone appears before God according to the way interpreted in the Raisa, this is a superfluous verse already stated in Exodus. And it is free, has no additional reason for being here other than to use as a Gzeirah Shava, as an instance of similar wording. To teach us about the provisions given to the Hebrew slave when he's freed. That is 5 stela for each kind of sheep, grain, and wine, as much as the redemption of the firstborn. Wow. That's the Gemara said we learned something else out in Masechta Kedushin. That when you played a slave, you're not allowed to let him empty-handed. You have to send him out with a certain amount of money of grain and a certain amount of money of wine and even sheep. You have to. It's called in Hebrew. It's called Hanukkah, which is a concept of when you send out somebody, you fire when you fire somebody, you got to give him Hanukkah. You got to. There's an English word to it. You have to give him. There's an English word to it. You have to give him the money Today we give
Compensation.
what?
Compensation.
Compensation.
Severance pay.
Severance pay or whatever. We give it like a month per year. So if he worked for 10 years, you're given 10 months, 10 months to be able to find another job. So too, when you free a slave, you have to give him hanaka. You can't just let him out free, empty-handed. So this is what the plan is. Funny they come, you're not allowed to send the slave free. You're not allowed to send the free empty-handed. The simple, that's the medrash, that's the Gemara. Simple meaning of the verse, the Torah is talking about the sacrifice of the holiday. Question is, how do you put it into the verse over here? But that's a simple meaning of the verse. But according to its interpretation, the Gemara is not talking about, the Torah is not talking about the holiday. The Torah is talking about how do you send away a person that you have freed. So that's the connection. When you free an ox, you free a child, the child belongs to the kohen, you free him, you have to give 5 shekel. 5 shekel, you give 5 points. So too, when you free a slave, you have to give him 5% of your 5 coins of each number. 6 days a week you shall work. And on the 7th day you shall rest. In plowing and harvest you shall rest. Again, it's a very interesting pasuk. What's going on? You're talking about Shabbos, are we talking about Shvius? What's going on over here? If it refers to Shabbos, regular Shabbos, what is our plowing and harvest mentioned in particular, not other kinds of work? What is the connection over here? Some of the rabbis say that this verse prohibits plowing before the 7th year, on the 6th year, which enters the 7th year. This is not talking about Shabbos. Jeshamin is going on, but Shvi Tishbei is telling us that even before the 6th year, before the 7th year, the growth that is going into the 7th year is already prohibited in the 6th year of the Shemitah, which enters the 7th year. Plowing that benefits the crop that grow in the 7th year. The harvest of the 7th year that grows after the 7th year. The crops that have at least 1/3 of their growth during the 7th year must be treated with sanctity of the 7th year. So if you have certain crops that are growing in the 7th year, but they don't complete until the 8th year, like this year, last year was Shemitah. And if there are crops that didn't complete 1/3 and they have to complete the majority in the 8th year, then there's still the problem of Shemitah of those crops. This teaches us that we must add with the sanctity of the 7th year. So this teaches us you must add from the unholy, the year preceding the 7th year, to the holy of the 7th year. You have to add, like some people add on today on Shabbos. We add a couple of minutes before Shabbos to start the Shabbos. We end the Shabbos a couple of minutes later. So we add, it's expression, you add from the unholy onto the holy. Accordingly, this is the meaning: 6 days you may work, on the 7th day you shall rest. And concerning the work of the 6 days which are permitted to you, there is a year in which plowing and harvest are prohibited. Plowing and the harvest of the 7th year need not to be stated because it already states, the field shall plow. Consequently, deduce that this verse means the plowing before the 7th and the harvest after the 7th. Other rabbis say the verse speaks only about the weekly Shabbos. The plowing and the harvest mentioned here, the context are to inform us that just as it's prohibited to plowing of optional plowing, so is harvest referred to the optional harvest. The harvest of the Omer. That's what the pasuk comes to teach us. The pasuk comes to teach us that certain things, even if they fall on Shabbos, you're allowed to do. That is, Pesach is coming up, and we know that after the 2nd day of Pesach, after the 1st day of Pesach, the first night of Pesach, we do the Omer in time of Beis Hamikdash. We don't do it today, but we do the. What would happen if that would fall on Shabbos? They would do it. They would do it. They would cut the crop of the Omer, even if it's on Shabbos, because that's not a permitted object concept. This is an obligation. So it tells us you shall cut the Omer at a certain night. So therefore, if that night happened to fall on Shabbos, then they would do it. They would cut the Omer. Because it's mandatory. Consequently, it seems the Shabbos. Like, for example, today you do a bris milah on Shabbos. You circumcise a child on Shabbos, even though it's not, you're not allowed to do that in a regular situation. So that's why, for example, going back to, in halacha, for example, going back to the previous of a child born, in halacha, you only circumcise a child that has natural birth on Shabbos. But a child that had a C-section, so then you don't do that on Shabbos. Even if you had a C-section on the Shabbos before, you won't do the circumcision on a Shabbos. Well, let's say a circumcision that's pushed off. So once it's pushed off, you cannot do the circumcision on a Shabbos again. You have to do the circumcision during the week. Only a mitzvah, that circumcision, is on the 8th day. The Torah says you shall circumcise a child on its 8th day. So if, let's say, it was born on Shabbos, natural birth, the next Shabbos is going to be the bris, even on Shabbos, because it's a mitzvah in the Torah that you should circumcise your child on Shabbos. So we're going to do something which is really prohibited on Shabbos, because it's a mitzvah. If it's once it loses its mitzvah status due to different technical issues, then it does not, then you're not allowed to do it on Shabbos anymore. Then it has to be done during the week. And you shall make the festival of weeks, the first of the week's harvest. The Chag Asif, Kufas Hashanah, and the festival and gathering at the term of the year. So here you have Shavuos and the holiday of Sukkot, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot. Rashi says, "Bekurei Chitim." This is the festival you bring the first 2 breads made of wheat, because it was the celebration of the harvest. Bekurei Shemin Chadashain, this is the first meal offering brought in the temple for the new crop, new wheat crop, because the meal offering of the Omer of Passover is brought from barley. So the cutting of the meal, which mentioned before on Shabbos, if it fell on Shabbos, was made out of barley, was done from barley. So the first wheat offering that was brought in the Beis Hamikdash was wheat, not barley, but wheat, because everything that was done in the Beis Hamikdash was done with wheat. All the menachos was wheat, with not barley. The only thing that was done with barley was the Omer. That was the first night of Pesach, after the first night of Pesach, second night of Pesach. That's how we start counting Sfiras Ha'omer on the second night of Pesach. But that was when they cut the Omer. It was a whole celebration. They brought the Omer to the Beis Hamikdash, to the Torah. And that's a mitzvah. But when did they bring the Shtei Lechem, the holiday of the real celebration of the wheat, the harvest of the wheat, was actually on Shavuos, 50 days later. That's why Shavuos has a different names to it. It's called Chag HaShavuos, the counting of weeks, the Chag HaMatan Torah in the davening, but it's also the holiday of Bikurim, the first fruits and the first of wheats. And that's the only times that we brought the Shtei Lechem, was brought chametz. All the milchas were matzah. And on Shavuos, we brought Shtei Lechem, the 2 loaves of bread, mentioned in the Torah, to symbolize the wheat, which was brought on Shavuos, chametz, into the Beis Hamikdash. Chag HaAsif. Chag HaAsif occurs in time of gathering of your grain, the fields into your house. The gathering, Asif, is noted by into your house. Kufas Hashanah, which is the return of the year, at the beginning of the coming year, which is the holiday of Sukkot, which happens at the end of Tishrei. In the month of Tishrei, which is the first month of the year, counting for creation. So therefore, that's the sun. The holidays are based on the sun rotation. And therefore, Pesach is in the springtime, as it is in April, and Shavuos is in the time of the wheat is done, which is in the month of the Sivan, and the gathering of the wheat starts again the year in the month of Tishrei. Kufas Ashari after the summer, right before the rainy season, starting over the growth. Kufas Loshem Mesiba Vakafa, the term denoting around, encompassing, going in a circle. Shalom every 3 times a year, all your males shall appear directly before the master. They come to the Beis Hamikdash. Every Jew was obligated to come to Yerushalayim on Pesach, on Shavuos, and on Sukkot. You're obligated to come to the Beis Hamikdash. All the males amongst you. It's repeated elsewhere, and many commandments in the Torah which are stated and repeated. Many of them 3 or 4 times, in order to cause the liability to mete out punishment according to the number of negative commandments that contain the number of positive commandments that they contain. So the Torah keeps on saying it over and over and over again a couple of times. This mitzvah of Aliyas Haregel, going up to the Beis Hamikdash on Sukkot and on Pesach and on Shavuos, the obligation for every Jew. So when your Jew went up to Aliyas Haregel, he got many mitzvahs because it's mentioned many times. And if your Chas V'Shalom didn't go up, he got many Avedis by not going up to the Beis Hamikdash 3 times a year. I'm going to chase out when I'll drive out the nations before you. And I'll widen your borders. And nobody will come. Can you imagine if the nations of the world surrounding Israel know that all the Jews went to Yerushalayim and it's the best time to come and attack? That's the best time because who's at home? Only the women and the children. Everybody else. And actually, a lot of women and children went up also. So now you have the whole Jewish nation in Yerushalayim for the holiday of Pesach. That might be a good time for the nations of the world to come and attack you. The Rebbe says, don't worry. Nobody will come and want your land. Those 3 times a year. She says, I'll drive out. I will drive out. And so he's beginning to drive out. Rosh, he drove out. And this way, you'll be far from the temple. And so you can't constantly appear before me. Therefore, I'm setting these 3 pilgrimage festivals for you. Now, Baruch Hashem, today, you have byways and highways. In the time of when the Jewish people came to Israel, for thousands of years, you lived in Tzfas. You lived in the Negev. To come to Yerushalayim, it took a journey of many days. It took at least 7 days. Some places it took 7 days to reach Yerushalayim from certain places that it's slow. So it took time to go to Yerushalayim. It self-understood took time. Aliyas Haregel was a major commitment on a Jew to make the journey, if he lived very far away, to Yerushalayim and make the journey back. Today, it would be much easier. You can do it in the same day. But even today, you have to go the whole Yontiv. You'll have to go the whole Yontiv to Yerushalayim. You can't just drive in and drive out. Even today, you would have to go there, go be in a hotel, and then have to wait till it's Yontiv to go back home. So you'll also be a day or 2 out of your home. But in those days, it could be some Jews were 7 days away from their home. And there was 7-day journey by foot. They would travel with a donkey and they'd travel to Yerushalayim. It was a major mitzvah. Do not slaughter the blood or sprinkle the blood of my sacrifice with leaven. Again, we already learned this mitzvah already before. And do not let the Passover feast to remain until morning. We also learned this. The Rashi says this teaches us you should not slaughter the Passover sacrifice as long as this leaven exists. And that's why Pesach starts, Mitzvah Hashem, in less than a month, Pesach starts not at night, on the 14th at night, but it starts on the 14th during the day. Because you already brought the Korban Pesach ready at 1 o'clock during the day. And once you bring the Korban Pesach, you're not allowed to have chametz anymore. So therefore, Pesach starts different than any other holiday, starts during the day. And this comes to warn us, one is to sprinkle the blood, and one needs to bring the members of the group to bring the sacrifice when, So today, actually, we established for all Jews, the Pasuk tells us everybody can do it their own time. So before I bought my Korban Pesach, I had to make sure to get rid of my chametz. Today we do it all the same time. So by 11, exactly to 12:20 something this year, your chametz has to be burnt already. That's why your chametz needs to be done. So from around 11:17 to 12:20 some this year, you need to make sure to get rid of your chametz, and everything must be done. And then you have to finish. That's what the next concept is, that you're not allowed to leave over the Korban Pesach until the morning. Do not remain overnight until the morning away from the altar. Remain overnight on top of the altar has no effect, does not disqualify the sacrifice. The Mishnah is staying overnight only compels to the breaking of dawn. Pesach. This refers to the sacrificial parts. From here we learn to apply this rule to the instance of burning the fats and the limbs of the sacrifice, namely that it may be formed after the break of dawn if the sacrifice part stayed on the altar all night until the break of dawn. So if the sacrifice was already on the Mizbeach, like Kohen came and saw that there were certain things fell out of the fire, even though it was the break of dawn, he pushed it back in the fire. Verse 26. Choices of the first of your soil you shall bring to the house of the Lord. This is the mitzvah of Bikurim. What you brought on Shavuos, first fruits. You're not allowed to cook the kid in the mother's milk. She says, this refers to the fruits of the 7 species, which the land of wheat, barley, vines, figs, pomegranates, olives, and honey of dates. So though the Bikurim, the first fruit is not apples and oranges, it's specifically Kuri ad Mascha, what the 7 fruits that Eretz Yisrael was not blessed, was Shabbat, was praised with. Actually, this warning again is against cooking meat and milk together. This commandment is written in the Torah 3 times. And why is written 33 times? 1 for eating, you're not allowed to eat milk and meat together. 1 for deriving benefit, you're not allowed any hana from milk and meat that was cooked together. And the other is for cooking it. So we know we're not allowed to cook milk and meat, whether for ourselves or for somebody else. You're not allowed to have not allowed to eat milk and meat that was cooked together. And you're not allowed to have any benefit from milk and meat that was cooked together. You cannot take, let's say by mistake, you took and you milk and meat and cooked it together. You now have to destroy it. You can't give it to a non-Jew. You can't give it to your dog. You cannot do anything with it. It's very important to know this, because in essence, I don't know, people that have pets and they buy foods, they have to be careful not to buy something that has milk and meat together. Gedi, Rashi says Gedi is a young offspring, is meant even a calf or a lamb. Since the Torah has particularly in many places Gedi ism, a young goat is meant, it's learned from mention, Gedi qualifies as suckling. So Gedi doesn't mean only a goat. Chalev imay, Rashi says, why does the Torah say Chalev imay? It comes to exclude foul milk. It has to be the milk of an animal. But the rabbis even prohibited all milk. That's what we know that chicken and milk is a rabbinical prohibition. It's not a Torah prohibition to mix chicken and milk together. The rabbis prohibited the mixture of chicken and milk. Torah did not. That completes Chumash. We now go to the middle of chapter 35 of Tanya. Alter Rebbe is explaining statement of the Zohar. He ended off yesterday with a statement of the Zohar. Zohar says that a Jew, a Chochem, a wise man, ain't a Bereishim. A wise man has his eyes in his head. And that means, Alter Rebbe says, and that's what we get, the Zohar says he wears a yarmulke, because by wearing a yarmulke, he shows reverence to what's above his head. What's above his head is the Shekhinah, presence of God. And that's symbolic in the concept of what we say, Ner Neshama Nishma, Ner Hashem Nishma. A candle, we're symbolic to a candle. And a candle has three things. It has oil, it has a wick, and it has a fire. And the fire is the godliness. The wick is the human being, the physical human being. And the oil is the good deeds. A chacham, a wise man, he always looks above. He always makes sure that his neshama, that his godliness is well taken care of. And that he always has enough oil, enough good deeds to make sure that the fire continues. But Alter Rebbe explains this example. That's the Zohar. Now the Alter Rebbe goes in to try to explain the example even more. Meaning of this analogy, they compare the light of the Shekhinah to the light of the candle. That's the Zohar. Is clear to every intelligent person. As the Alter Rebbe will conclude shortly, after close examining of its detail, just as it is true of the candle flame. That it does not shed light, nor do retain by the wick without the oil. So if the fire doesn't have oil, the wick is not going to keep it. By nature, fire strains upward and will not remain below unless restrained by the wick or wood, for example. But a wick alone rapidly consumes, and the fire vanishes quickly. Moreover, the burning wick produces a dim and smoky light, for it consists of material insufficient, refined to be completely absorbed by the flame. Oil, in the other hand, is completely transformed into the flame and absorbed by it. That's the beauty of a beautiful candle that has good oil. It's burning steadily and produces pure and clear light. So even though the fire will be there for a while, but it's not beautiful light. Beautiful light is the beautiful light of a candle that has oil. This is what's meant by the Alter Rebbe statement, that without oil, the flame of the candle, A, does not shed light. And number two, nor retained by the wick, it's gonna dissipate. Returning now to the point of the analogy. So to the Shekhinah, the light. Sheira al gufa, the Shekhinah, the light does not rest on the person. Shenimshel b'sila, which is compared to the wick. Only through the performance of good deeds. The body can only act as a wick, not as oil. It is coarse, physical being, which cannot be absorbed within the light of the Shekhinah, but will always remain separate from it. The good deeds that man performs, that's the oil. And that's the oil that is consumed by the light. So the question is, what about my neshama? Why do I need to have oil? Why don't I have good deeds? Don't I have a soul, a godly soul? So Alter Rebbe says, because the neshama is part of the part of the godliness. The neshama is part of the Shekhinah. So you cannot just use the neshama. You have a neshama. Why do I need to have good deeds? The neshama is part of the Shekhinah. It's part of the light. For the light of God is the neshama. Seven Zohar, that the one soul, although part of God above, is insufficient to serve as oil for the wick. Question is implied here. Why should the soul itself, divine and thus certainly suited to being absorbed within the light of the Shekhinah, require anything external, such as good deeds? to serve as the oil for the light. Surely the soul itself to constitute the oil. The reason for this is that the Rebbe now concludes the sentencing began early in the words. The meaning of this analogy is clear and understandable to every intelligent person. The Rebbe will proceed to explain why good deeds can serve as the oil. Why good deeds can serve as oil for the light of the Shekhinah, which the divine soul can. Explanation in brief. Man's soul is not, after all, completely nullified before God. And one with him to the extent that it's capable of becoming absorbed within godly light. This is true even to souls of tzaddikim, who service God with the lofty forms of love and fear. Indeed, it is the soul's very love of God that emphasizes its separateness. For love entails two separate entities, the lover and the beloved. So once you say, I love God, is I love God. Even a tzaddik who loves God, that means he is separate from God. He loves God. Similar with fear, there's one who fears and the other one who's feared. Only a mitzvah, a good deed, as Alter Rebbe will explain further on, are completely one with God, can therefore serve as the oil and be absorbed within the flame of the light of the Shekhinah that is kindled over man. And that's why you cannot do it without doing a mitzvah. It's impossible for this oil, for this fire to burn without a mitzvah. It's impossible to become absorbed in this fire without a mitzvah. Just like it's impossible for anything to be absorbed, totally absorbed within the fire without oil. As Alter Rebbe's words, Kini nishmas adam, for the soul of man, afilu tzaddik gomer, even if he's a tzaddik gomer. Moshe Rabbeinu, Oived Havai serves God b'yidah v'ava b'tanugim. He serves God not through serving, he serves God with tanugim, we mentioned before, with delight. Meaning his love consists of delight and experience of godliness, a most lofty aspect of love. Nevertheless, there's no total nullification. There's still self. There's still an aspect of self. It's impossible for even the tzaddik, his neshama, to be totally nullified. Because then he wouldn't be in existence. So the second this neshama has an existence, it's a separate existence. And therefore, it's not a complete unity. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu wanted. Moshe Rabbeinu wanted a complete unity. And the Rebbe said, it's impossible to have a complete unity. Then if you were completely united with me, you'd be nullified, totally nullified. You wouldn't be in existence. So therefore, if there is an existence, even of your soul, then it's automatically a separate existence. He's a separate entity that fears God and loves God. So since it's not absorbed into godliness, the oil is absorbed within the flame, the soul cannot serve as oil. Because then the oil, it wouldn't be a good flame. It would be a flame that doesn't get absorbed. The oil needs to be totally absorbed in the flame. The oil has the capability of total nullification. It's unbelievable. Oil has the capability to become part of the flame. And that's why Torah mitzvahs are compared to oil. Because a mitzvah has no identity on its own. The opposite is a mitzvah and good deeds. That is God's will. That's it. There's no other reason why I'm doing this mitzvah because what the Eibishter wanted me to do. That's the bracha. The Eibishter gave us this mitzvah. I'm doing it because God commanded me. No other reason. V'ritzayni yisbarach, and the will of God, who makar ha'chaim. That is the true source of life for all the worlds and all creation. They live only because God so desires. The difference between divine will expressed in the mitzvah, the same will expressed in creation lies in the ladders, descending to them by means of many contractions and concealments of the contents of God, meaning the eternal aspect of supernal will, with only the external, superficial aspect of God's expressed itself in creation, through the descent of level after level. Until ultimately God's will comes in to create physical things. That comes into its own existence, its own entity, created ex nihilo as separate entities without becoming nullified out of existence. In this skill, as I mentioned above. So without the previous enumerated forms of concealment of godliness, all created beings will be completely nullified before God. We would completely nullified before the divine will that created them, and they would have no independent identity. Thus, the divine will expressed in creation can only come about through its seemingly contractions, accumulations, and descent. So that's why ultimately this physical world, which is all created with God's will, seemingly has its own identity because it's so concealed with the contraction, that the world doesn't see God's will. Hashem kem mitzvahs. The opposite is a mitzvah. Hashem pnimis etzeinim v'sheis barach. A mitzvah is the internal aspect of the divine will, and there's nothing hidden. Ve'ein hesta ponim klal. There's no hidden concept in a mitzvah. Every mitzvah I do, because that's what the Eibishter wants. That's what God wants. I have no other way to explain it. Why I put on tefillin today. Because that's what God wanted. That's what God wrote into it. There's nothing hidden. There's no great, there is great philosophy, but I do it because the Eibishter said so. End of story. That is the beauty of a mitzvah. There's no contractions. There's nothing hidden. It's the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I don't have to understand the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I don't have to understand the will of God. I do the will of God. On the contrary, mitzvahs are the underlying purpose and the inner aspect of the will of creation and its entirety. To illustrate an example, one engaged in business, so they will realize a profit and thereby support his family. And all he wants to business to prosper, wants to profit, and wants to provide for his family. Yet his true inner will lies only in supporting his family. His desire for profits merely incidental, external to his will. And his desire for business even more so. Because what's the inner will is that he should support his family. That's his inner will. That's why he goes out to business, and that's why he goes out and he works hard. Is all, not that he should have business, not that he should have to work hard. He wants all his inner will to support his family. So too with the divine will as expressed in creation and expressed in mitzvahs. The desire for creation is his external will. It is generated by the inner desire that a Jew observe mitzvahs. That's the whole purpose of this world. The whole purpose that there's a beautiful world and there's a beautiful creations and everything is so beautiful that a yid should do a mitzvah. And that is the whole inner purpose of creation. So we have the whole world and all its inhabitants and all its creations and every beautiful thing in the world is all that a yid should put on tefillin today. And every Jewish man should put on tefillin today. And the midst of every Jewish woman, in the midst of light Shabbos candles today. And every Jew should sit down tonight, do a Shabbos meal, and make a bracha, make kiddush. That's the whole reason why this whole world is this. And then you have the other reason. It's like a beautiful world. It's a beautiful world. It is. God wants to have this beautiful world. God likes a beautiful world. And we like a beautiful world. But what's its true inner purpose? Why do we want this beautiful world? So be able to do a mitzvah. To be able to enjoy this world for its real purpose. So that we would be able to do what God wants in this world. And that's why a beautiful world helps a yid do the mitzvah in a beautiful way. Because it's a beautiful world. So that's the inner aspect of the creation, the outer aspect of the creation. So that's the problem in the world in general. You get lost in the outer aspect of how beautiful this world is. How beautiful the nation, this beautiful world is. But really the inner aspect of why there's a beautiful world. Not because there's a need of a beautiful world. There's the need of the mitzvah. There's the need of the true reason, the true purpose in this beautiful world. It's the mitzvah. And when we do the mitzvah, there we see the true internal aspect of why we living and we are in this beautiful creation. Because over there, because the mitzvah represents God's true inner will. And because it's in them, there's no concealment of that will. Unlike the case of creation, where we have to find a reason why there's a beautiful world. Over here, I have the reason. The reason is God wanted this beautiful mitzvah. There's no reason but itself. It's not there for something else, the mitzvah. It's there for itself. Everything else in the world is there for something else. Here it is, there for itself. So I have wealth and I have happiness and I have health, all for something else. And over here, I have a mitzvah that the Eibishter created for not for something else, but for itself. That is the connection. That is the beautiful connection that I have with HaKadosh Baruch Hu to do God's will. There's no other hidden agendas or purposes in this mitzvah besides to accomplish the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and to connect this world with the essence of its life. And they become one. It's united and contained within God's will, and the mitzvah truly joined perfectly with God's unity. So now you understand why it says, last say, what's so important, how the mitzvah is even greater than your soul. The mitzvah is even greater than your neshama, because your neshama will never be able to become one. But your mitzvah becomes one. Thus, it's clear why the above mentioned metaphor, the mitzvahs can serve as oil for the light of the Shekhinah, for they are truly absorbed within the transforming and transformed into the light of divine will, just as oil is absorbed in the flame. Alter Rebbe will arrive at this conclusion after primary discussion on what the Zohar means when it says the Shekhinah light, says that the light of the Shekhinah rests on man, and that you'll have to wait tomorrow. Continue tomorrow with Alter Rebbe continues to explain this analogy of the Zohar. Beautiful chapter of Tanya. I hope that you will all learn tomorrow's Tanya by yourself as it's Shabbos, so you'll all learn that Tanya on your own. But the Alter Rebbe is bringing out such a beautiful point, you'll understand. And that's why it says you should run to do a mitzvah. Understand why. And every mitzvah that the Eibishter gave us, we should realize that's the greatest chus, the greatest merit that we can do in this world. There's nothing else that we can do in this world that connects to God, reveals God, becomes united with God, but every mitzvah that we do in this world. Today is the 17th day of the month, which is chapter 83 to chapter 87. Chapter 83 to chapter 87, and you would accomplish Chitas. As I said, I want to wish you all a good Shabbos, and I hope that you will learn your Chitas tomorrow. And the Shem will come all together on Sunday. We'll continue to learn the Chitas today on Sunday at 8 a.m. Don't forget that this Rosh Shabbos, they changed the clock. So we go an hour ahead. You lose an hour. So it's 8 o'clock will be 9 o'clock. We'll get together on Sunday at 8 o'clock. Change the clock. I wish you a wonderful Shabbos, a happy Shabbos, a healthy Shabbos, beautiful Shabbos. This Shabbos also Shabbos Parah. We added another portion to the reading of the Torah. So see everybody. I hope everybody goes to shul, and here's the reading of Torah. A wonderful and beautiful Shabbos.